On the fourth night of the storm, the lifeline wire began to sing. It was a thin sound under the roar, the kind of note a fence gives off when the wind has found something loose and means to keep working at it. Josiah Rennick heard it through the barn wall and knew exactly which panel had gone. The north slat fence, second bay from the creek end, the one he had braced twice already and doubted both times. Outside, Long Fork Valley had stopped existing. The wind came off the divide at better than 60 miles an hour, and the thermometer nail by the door had quit at 32 below sometime before dark. Snow moved sideways in solid sheets. A man could not see the lantern in his own hand once he was 10 steps from the wall. If that panel tore free, the wind would swing around the storm porch and pack the barn doorway shut in under an hour. 41 head of stock were standing warm behind that door. 2 of them were mothers. Inside the barn, Pearl was down in the straw, with a calf turned wrong 6 weeks early. In the cabin, Junie was crying the tired, hoarse cry of a baby who had been crying too long. Cal Duffy lay by the stove with white patches on both cheeks. The same Cal Duffy who had leaned on a fence post in October and called the slat fence Rennick's toothpick wall. Josiah tied the rope around his chest and put the other end in Iona Taro's hands. She did not tell him to be careful. She wrapped the line twice around her wrist, once around the doorpost, and looked at him the way she had looked at him the first morning, when he was a stranger, asking for milk. The rope paid out. It went slack. Then it stopped moving altogether. 7 weeks earlier, a man had walked onto Sparrow Bench with a handcart and a single request. How that request had turned into the only thing standing between this ranch and ruin is the whole of the story. He came up the wagon track in the last week of September, 1886, and the country had already aged him past his years. Josiah Rennick was 38. He looked older around the eyes. His coat had been mended at the shoulder with cloth that did not match, and the mending was neat, which somehow made it worse. One hand hauled the cart. The other arm carried 11-month-old Junie against his chest, wrapped in a blanket that had been a horse blanket first. 8-year-old Toby walked at the wheel and never once asked how much farther. Josiah had spent 11 years as a millwright and general repairman, working flumes and grain elevators and freight sheds from the Missouri to the Yellowstone. He was good. Crews asked for him by name. Then Ada took a fever in March that turned into pneumonia in April, and by the end of the month, a man who fixed things for a living could not fix the only thing that mattered. A repair crew moves every 11 days. You cannot move an infant every 11 days. 4 outfits had already turned him away that autumn. One would have hired him, but not the children. One let them sleep in a wagon shed and put them back on the road at first light with a sack of cold biscuits. One had a woman come out to the gate and say kindly that the baby would do better placed with a family in town. Josiah had thanked her and walked away, and did not stop walking until the buildings were out of sight. That last morning before Sparrow Bench, Junie would take nothing but thin flour gruel mixed with creek water. Josiah told Toby there would be food by evening. He watched his son nod, and then he watched his son fold half a biscuit into his shirt, where he thought his father could not see. The boy was not hoarding it for himself. Josiah understood that immediately, and it went through him like cold water. Toby had stopped believing that tomorrow would arrive with anything in its hands, and he had made himself the one who carried the difference. Then the track topped a wind-scoured rise, and Sparrow Bench lay below them along the creek. Josiah read the place before he read the people in it. The haystack sat directly on bare ground, with its shoulders slumped. The barn's main doors opened square into the northwest, straight down the throat of the valley. A cottonwood windbreak that had once been useful now stood half dead and far too close to the buildings. Smoke came off the cabin chimney flat and low. But inside the corral, the milk cows were standing with their heads up, and the water in the trough was clear, and somebody had recently reset the top rail of the corral with new wire. Somebody here was still fighting. Iona Taro was at the trough with a hammer, breaking a skin of ice off the surface with the flat of the head. She was 34 years old, and she had buried her husband 2 springs back when Bram Taro's horse went down in the flooded ford below the bench. She wore a man's canvas coat with the sleeves pushed above her elbows. A feed tally book stuck out of her belt. One glove had gone smooth and dark across the palm from 20 years of rain leather. Nothing in her posture suggested a woman waiting to be rescued. She watched them come the whole last quarter mile. When Josiah stopped at the fence, she asked one question. "What work do you know?" He did not give her his history. He gave her a list because a list is a thing a person can check. Barn frame and roof, water lines, springs, gravity feed, stackyards, doors and hinges and sills, wagon boxes. Whatever winter is about to take off you. Then he looked down at Junie, who had gone quiet and was chewing the corner of her blanket because hunger had outlasted crying 2 days ago. "Give my kids milk," he said. "Let us sleep out of the wind. I'll fix your ranch." Iona set the hammer on the trough rail. "What makes you so sure anything is broken?" He lifted his chin toward the buildings behind her. "Your barn doors face the wind that will kill you. Your hay is drinking water out of the ground from the bottom up. Your cottonwoods are close enough that whatever they catch is going to land on your door, instead of out in the meadow where you want it." The silence after that was long. Confidence was cheap in that country. Anybody with a hat could have it. Iona looked at the boy standing at the wheel with his hands in his sleeves. Then she looked at the baby. Then she stepped forward and took Junie out of Josiah's shaking arms without asking permission, the way a person takes a hot pan off a stove. "The milk comes first," she said. "You can argue about my barn tomorrow." She fed the baby in her own kitchen, warm cow's milk cut with water, tested against the inside of her wrist, given slow because a starved stomach will refuse a fast one. She set beef and barley in front of Toby, with cornbread and dried plums, and she set a bowl in front of Josiah too, and when he said quietly that he was not hungry, she did not answer him. She just did not take the bowl away, and after a while he ate it. Toby ate with one arm curled around his plate. Before he was finished, he slid a piece of cornbread off the edge and into his pocket. He did it smoothly. He had clearly done it many times. Iona saw, she said nothing about it. She cut another piece and laid it beside his plate, as though it had been sitting there all along, and she had simply forgotten to mention it. Facts came out slowly across that table, only the ones that were needed. Ada Rennick had been dead since April. Bram Tarrow had been dead 2 winters. Iona had never had children. Sparrow Bench was carrying a note at the bank in ransom, after losing 19 head the previous winter, and the note came due in June. Late that night, Iona went up into the loft over the pantry, and came down with a cradle. The joinery was good, the wood was not finished, and one rail had never been sanded. Bram had started it the summer before he drowned. She had kept it in a loft for 2 winters instead of burning it, which told Josiah something he was careful not to say out loud. Junie slept in it that night, warm for the first time in a month. Toby slept with one hand closed around the cornbread in his pocket. Josiah was walking the place before the sun cleared the east ridge. He did not carry a hammer. He carried a strip of wool yarn and a shovel and a pocket rule, and for the first 2 hours he did nothing but look. He hung the yarn beside the barn door and watched how the air curled through the gap and went straight down the centre alley. He dug into the ground under the north face of the haystack and brought up dirt that was damp and warm and smelled sour. He poured a bucket into the far end of the trough and counted how long the overflow took to move, and it never really moved at all. He walked the spring line from the box up on the bench down to the yard, marking with his boot where the pipe ran too shallow across the frost line. Inside the cabin he found a rime of frost living permanently in the chinking on the north wall, low down near the sill. Iona followed him for the last hour without announcing herself. When he finally talked, he pointed instead of gesturing. "The barn isn't cold because the walls are thin. It's cold because the wind comes in the door and walks the length of the building and goes out the back like it owns the place." He crouched by the stack. "This hay is rotting from the ground up. You're feeding good hay off the top of a stack that's spoiling underneath it." He tipped his head toward the yard. "Your spring line has no fall in the last 40 feet. Water sits in it. Standing water freezes. Moving water is a lot harder to freeze." He put his palm flat on the cabin wall. "Chinkings let go of the logs on this side." Last he looked at the cottonwoods. "And those are too close." Iona folded her arms. "Bram planted those." He wasn't wrong. That surprised her enough to show she had been braced for something else. "They break a spring wind," Josiah said. "Spring wind comes up the valley. Winter comes over the divide. Trees can't turn around." He planted for the weather he was standing in. Some of the hardness went out of her face, though not all of it. He looked over the whole bench once more, the way a man looks at a job he intends to finish. 7 weeks, water first because everything else waits on water. Hay second, then the fence out in the open ground, then the porch on the barn, then the chinking and the stake line before the first real storm. Iona was quiet for a while, then she pointed at the tool shed. "You get 8 days," she said. "After 8 days, I'll know whether you see problems or invent them." He started with the work least likely to cause an argument. They tore into the haystack first, Josiah and Iona and Toby, forking the bottom 2 feet away into a waste pile that steamed in the morning air. Underneath it, the ground was black. Josiah built a platform out of lodgepole rails that had been lying behind the shed since Bram's time, laid on cross skids so the whole stack sat 8 inches clear of the earth. He rebuilt the stack in 2 ricks instead of 1 mound, with a hand's width of air between the rows and a hard crown on top, so water shed off instead of soaking in. Toby's job was the gaps. Josiah cut him a stick 8 inches long and told him nothing else needed measuring. The boy went down the whole row on his knees, setting his stick between the ricks and calling out numbers. And by noon, he had said more words in a row than he had said in the 4 days since they arrived. The waterline came next. Josiah opened a test trench and found the pipe buried barely 2 feet under the frost line. It wanted 4.5 in that country, with fall enough to drain itself. "We can't dig the whole run before snow," Iona said, looking at the trench. "Then we don't dig the whole run." He drew the line in the dirt with the point of the shovel. "We take the 40 feet from the spring box to the trough. We give it full, and we put in a standpipe with a drain valve at the low end so the water walks out of the pipe every time the stock finishes drinking. The rest of the line can wait for June." She looked at the trench a while longer, then went and got the second shovel. There was no argument, just a shorter plan. That afternoon, Hester Vance came over from the next place south with a crock of soft cheese and news, which was the way Hester delivered both. She was 70, widowed twice, and she kept a private ledger of who in Longfork was eating and who was not. "Dorsey Whitlock's been asking about your new man," she said, setting the crock down. "Asking at the store where he came from and whether he's got papers. Nobody had an answer, so he made one up." Then her eyes went to the cornbread heel showing out of Toby's coat pocket by the door. She looked at Iona. "Should I leave 1 loaf or 2? "Leave 3, Iona said. By the 4th day, stakes ran in a long line across the open flat northwest of the yard, and Josiah had explained the shape of the thing twice before anyone believed him. The fence would not stand in front of the barn. It would stand 38 feet out from it, well upwind, out where the snow was welcome to pile as high as it liked. It would be built of split lodgepole lath nailed to a pole frame, 7 feet 4 at the tall end, with a hard gap left between every slat. That gap was the whole idea, and it was the part nobody understood. "You're building a fence with holes in it," Cal Duffy said. Cal was Whitlock's man, hired out to Sparrow Bench for the fall gather, and he had opinions. "A solid wall makes a cliff," Josiah said. "Wind goes over the top of a cliff and falls down the back of it and digs. You'll get a drift right where you don't want one. You want the wind to come through and lose its legs. Then the snow lies down on its own, out there and stays out there." Cal laughed and went to get a horse. Dorsey Whitlock rode in the next morning. He ran 11,000 acres on the far side of the ridge, and he owned the graded freight road that ran from the county line to the valley mouth, which meant that in a bad winter, he owned everybody's hay deliveries too. 2 springs ago, 6 weeks after Bram Tarrow drowned, Whitlock had offered Iona a price for Sparrow Bench that they both understood to be an insult. She had refused it. He had spent the time since then speaking about the place as a thing that would come to him eventually, on its own like weather. He got down off his horse without greeting anybody and walked the line of stakes. "Rennick's toothpick wall," he said, and nudged a post with his boot. "All this does is catch snow and bury your barn." Josiah leaned on the post driver. "It would, if I set it close." Whitlock's smile shifted about a 1/4 inch. "The distance is the whole trick," Josiah said. "The wall is just the excuse." Whitlock turned to Iona instead. "Since when does a drifter with a handcart plan your winter?" Iona did not look up from the tally book. "He isn't a drifter. He's my foreman until the work says otherwise." That landed on everyone in the yard, Josiah included. He kept his eyes on the post. Whitlock got back in the saddle. "You'll want my road open come January." "If you have business, put it on paper," Iona said. He gathered the reins and took one more look at the unfinished line of stakes. "Winter will tell us which one of us wasted the fall." Then he rode out. Toby watched the horse until it dropped over the rise. "What if he's right?" Josiah picked up the next post. Then we change it before the snow does. The first hard blow came in the second week of October, well ahead of schedule, and it made a liar out of him for about 4 hours. He had tied strips of red flannel to the top of every third post that morning, because he wanted to see the air instead of guess at it. Within 20 minutes of the wind arriving, he had his answer, and it was not the one he wanted. He had nailed the lath too tight through the middle third of the run. The wind climbed that section, rolled over the top, and dropped hard on the backside. Dry snow and dead grass began building a low tongue that pointed straight at the barn door, like an accusation. One lath panel tore its nails and went flapping. Ruby, the oldest milk cow, balked at the temporary passage and set back hard enough to spring a hinge. Across the flat, 2 of Whitlock's men stopped their wagon on the county road and sat there and watched. Josiah did not defend it. He got the bar and started pulling every fourth lath out of the tight section, and he did it fast, in front of the men who were watching. Iona came out and stood looking at the flannel strips for a long moment. "Set the next ones on a slant," she said. "Not flat to the wind. Angle them so it spreads sideways along the run, instead of piling against one spot." He looked at her. "Where did you get that?" "Snow does the same thing on the cut bank above the ford. It never piles where the bank is straight. It piles where the bank turns." They worked until it was too dark to see the flannel. When the next gust came through, it went into the fence and came out the other side with nothing left in it, and the strips on the barn side barely moved. The barn porch had its own lesson to teach. He built it as a right angle, an entry that turned hard so the wind could not shoot straight through, and Ruby refused it flatly. She would not walk into a dark corner. Iona measured the passage by eye and said widen it, so they moved the outer post 4 feet, opened the angle, and hung a lantern where the shadow had been. After that, the cows walked it without being asked. At dusk, Iona handed him the nail bag. "Your wall," she said. Then she nodded at the flannel still moving on the posts. "My wind." And she smiled barely, for the first time since he had come up the track. Word travels in a valley. In the 3rd week of October, Thaddeus Cole rode up from Ransom. Cole was the Stock Association's brand and health inspector for that whole end of the territory. A narrow, grey, unhurried man who had spent 20 years being the person who tells ranchers what their dead cattle died of. He did not laugh at any of it. He did something worse. He asked hard questions. A tight barn traps moisture, and wet cattle chill faster than cold ones. Deep bedding builds ammonia at the floor where the calves breathe. A hay platform can heat from the inside if air cannot cross under it. A homemade drain valve can suck dirt back up the line into the trough. A canvas curtain hung near a stovepipe is a house fire waiting for a windy night. Josiah listened to all of it without once interrupting, which Cole noticed. Then they went through the whole place together. They checked the ridge vent Josiah had cut into the barn roof and the cupola over it. They knelt and put bare hands into the bedding, down at the floor, and smelled it. They pushed an iron rod into the heart of the hayrick and pulled it out and held it against a cheek. They measured the clearance between the stovepipe and the hanging cloth in the cabin and moved the cloth 6 inches anyway. Before he left, Cole made one request. Keep a book, every day for a month. Temperature at daylight and at dark, inside the barn and out. Armloads of wood burned. Pounds of hay fed. Milk in the pail. Whether the bedding is damp under your hand. Every time you break ice. Iona hung a ledger on a nail by the kitchen door that evening. Cole stopped by the wall where the spring pipe crossed into open air. That's your weak point. Iron crossing from warm to cold. It'll freeze there before it freezes anywhere in the ground. I'll box it and pack it, Josiah said. Cole climbed into the saddle. I don't believe your system will hold. You shouldn't, Josiah said. Not until it does. Iona put the pencil in Toby's hand. Write today's numbers. The boy printed them carefully on the first line, and after that, on Sparrow Bench, numbers spoke before opinions did. Not everything held. The first batch of chinking failed inside 4 nights. Josiah had put too much clay in the mix. It dried hard and shrank away from the log and left a hairline gap all the way along the north sill, and when he held the wool yarn to it, the yarn still moved. He reached for the scraper without a word of excuse. Iona stopped him. My father sealed lambing sheds for 30 years. Bram learned it off him. Less clay, more hair, Chop your straws shorter and scratch the first coat rough before you put the second one on, so it has something to bite. They mixed it again her way. It bit. That same week, going through the loft after wool waste, Josiah found the oilcloth wagon sheet from his old outfit rolled up in the bottom of the cart. The stitching along the edge was Ada's, done in waxed linen with a saddler's needle, tight enough that it had outlived her by 1.5 years without a thread giving way. "She made this," he said. He stood in the cold loft holding it, and then he took out his rule and started marking where to cut it down for the storm porch. "You don't have to cut it," Iona said. They hung the whole sheet instead, full width, with the seam intact, doubled at the porch entry, where it took the worst of the weather. Not a stitch came out of it. He talked about Ada for the first time that night, while they were nailing the batten. He said she had never been afraid of cold, and never once checked the fire before she checked a child's wrist. He said she could put a seam in leather that would beat anything he could build out of wood. Iona said that Bram had kept 2 lanterns going every winter night, one in the barn and one in the kitchen window, because he claimed a man could get turned around in his own yard and be too proud to admit it. The next evening there were 2 lanterns burning again. Neither of them mentioned it. The cabin held its heat until nearly 4 a.m. after that, and Josiah lay awake listening to it not get cold. The rhythm of the place changed without anyone deciding it should. Josiah worked outdoors from dark to dark. Iona kept Junie, and she did it without any ceremony at all, the way she did everything. She warmed milk. She learned the difference between the cry that meant cold and the cry that meant hungry, which took her about 9 days. At first she held the baby stiffly, out from her body, like something borrowed. Then one afternoon, Junie stopped mid-cry at the sound of Iona's boots crossing the plank floor, and after that neither of them was borrowing anything. More than once Josiah came in at dark and found Iona writing feed weights in the ledger, one-handed with Junie asleep against her collar. He would take his gloves off and set them by the stove where she could get at them later and go back out to check the trough. One afternoon Toby was shelling beans into a wooden bowl at the table and asked, without any warning, why she did not have children of her own. "Some rooms get built and never filled," Iona said. Toby looked over at the cradle by the stove, where Junie was sleeping with her fist against her mouth. "That one's filled." Iona did not answer him. She reached over and moved the bowl closer so the beans would stop hitting the floor. The morning Josiah had been waiting for came in early November. He came in for coffee and saw the cornbread from the night before still sitting on the shelf, untouched, going stale. Toby had gone to bed without pocketing anything, and it had not occurred to him to. Somewhere in the last 6 weeks, without any announcement, the boy had started believing that tomorrow would show up with food in it. Josiah stood in the kitchen with his hat in his hand for a while. Over that, the first real cold snap arrived the 2nd week of November and dropped the valley to 11 degrees before daylight. It was the first honest test of the work. The old barn had never held above the high teens in a cold snap, with the alley wind crossing the floor all day. Now behind the slat fence with the porch shut, the milk barn sat between 30 and 34 degrees from dark to dark. The cabin burned 5 armloads instead of 8. The bedding came up dry under the hand at the floor. The hayrick smelled like hay. And then the water quit. The buried line was fine. The elbow where the pipe crossed the wall into open air had frozen solid, exactly where Cole had put his finger 6 weeks earlier. Josiah broke the ice off it with an axe, and did not offer any excuse for himself. "I missed it." They worked past midnight, the two of them. They dropped the drain valve 4 inches lower, built a wooden box around the elbow, packed it with drywall waste and chaff, wrapped the outside in tarred canvas, and left a deliberate airspace inside so the packing would not take up water and hold it against the iron. Iona came out at the end of it with coffee. Josiah took the cup without looking up. "I told you I'd fix this place." Water still froze. "You told me you'd fix it," she said. "You never told me you'd guess right the first time." He thought about that for a good while after she went in. The next morning they filled the trough and it ran clean. And when the last cow lifted her head, the line emptied itself down the drain exactly the way he had drawn it in the dirt in September. What he understood, standing there watching a pipe do nothing at all, was that Iona had never once been measuring whether he failed. She was measuring whether he was still there afterward. The ledger filled up 1 line at a time through the rest of November. The numbers made an argument that no amount of talking could have made. Wood used down close to 1/3 on the cold days, Hay used down better than a fifth. Milk steady in the pail since the day the waterline came right. The trough had not needed breaking once since the box went on the elbow. Cole came back in the first week of December and read the whole book from the first page to the last before he shut it. "I won't call it proven," he said. "But it is doing precisely what you claimed it would do, and I've not been able to say that about anything since the association started paying me." Whitlock came 4 days later, and he came with paper this time, because she had asked for paper. "When the snow closes the county road, my graded road is the only way freight moves into this end of the valley," he said. "It stays open to you if you sign your spring rights on the bench over to my herd. Otherwise it doesn't." "No," Iona said. Whitlock folded the paper back into his coat, unbothered. A cold week in November is not a winter. Josiah did not say anything at all while the man was in the yard. When the horse was gone, he asked one question. "How many days of hay if his road never opens?" 21 by last year's numbers, Iona said. "More if the ledger is telling the truth." He looked at the sky over the divide for a while. "We put up for 30. Iona opened the ledger, wrote 30 at the bottom of the page, and drew a line under it. The sky started changing on the 11th of January, 3 days ahead of anything. At midday, Ruby turned her tail to the northwest and would not graze, and the rest of the herd followed her without knowing why. The air went heavy and strange. Long grey bands lay flat across the top of the valley all afternoon. Then, an hour before dark, the wind quit entirely, which in that country is not peace and never has been. Every bird in the creek bottom was gone by morning. They stopped improving anything after that and started preparing, which is a different job. Stakes went into the frozen ground every 18 feet from the cabin door to the barn door, and a wire ran the whole length of them with a sliding iron ring on it and a rope hitched to the ring, because Josiah did not intend for anybody on that place to be holding a loose line in the dark. The cistern went to the top. Hay came in close to the barn without closing the air channels. Every lashing on the slat fence got looked at twice. The milk cows and the 2 heavy heifers came into the protected end. Extra lanterns went up inside the porch and stayed lit. A repair bag sat inside the barn door with a bar, wire, nails, a spare lath bundle, and a hatchet in it. Toby watched the last stake go in. "If we've got the wire, why do we need the stakes?" "The wire keeps you from wandering off," Josiah said. "The stakes tell you whether you're getting anywhere." Going through the shed for wire, Iona found an old survey stake with Bram's mark cut in the top, and she carried it out and set it in the first position closest to the cabin without comment. Josiah stitched a new strap onto the repair bag out of a length of Ada's harness leather. Nothing useful got left in a shed that week. Hester Vance came by on the 13th, on her way south to her nephew's place, to wait it out. She left goat milk on the table. Her eyes went to the 2 lanterns, burning at midday, in an empty kitchen, and for once in her life she did not say the thing she was thinking. Cole's note came up from Ransom the same evening, carried by a man who did not get down off his horse. An Arctic front was dropping out of Canada, across the whole Northern Territory. Winds above 60. Once it starts, stay inside. There was nothing left to do that had not been done. It came in before dawn on the 14th, out of the northwest, exactly where Josiah had said it would come from. The slat fence took the first of it and bent and held. The snow began building out on the flat where he had wanted it, 38 feet upwind, a long tongue growing off the back of the fence and lying down in open ground. The porch broke the force of the wind before it reached the animals. The trough filled and drained. The cistern cover held. Behind Ada's oilcloth, the children's room stayed warm enough that Toby slept in his shirt. Josiah and Iona crossed between the buildings one at a time, clipped to the ring on the wire, never both out at once. By noon of the first day, the 3rd stake from the barn was gone under a drift, and the 4th one still showed a hand of red flannel above the snow, and that was how they knew where the yard was. Late on the 2nd afternoon, something struck the barn wall twice. Josiah went out along the stake line into the white and found Cal Duffy face down beside the 6th marker, with his horse gone and both cheeks white to the bone. He had come off Whitlock's North Range 11 hours before and lost the crew in the first hour of it. "I saw the red," Cal said when he could talk. "Out in it. I just kept walking at the red." Nobody said anything to him about toothpick walls. Iona got his boots off and his hands into cool water and then warm. And Josiah went back out to check the fence. When Cal came around properly by the stove that night, he talked in pieces. Whitlock's north barn had wind coming through the length of it. The cattle were packed into one corner, and they were not getting to water because the pump line had gone solid on the first morning. He looked up at the oilcloth hanging between the rooms for a long time after that and did not say anything else. The temperature fell again before daylight on the third day, and Pearl went into labour 6 weeks early with the calf turned. Iona had one look and knew. The horse doctor in Ransom was 40 miles off, behind a road that no longer existed. There would be nobody coming. She scrubbed to the elbow in warm water, tied Pearl's tail off, got down in the straw, and went in after the calf's front legs with the calving straps she had boiled that morning. It took a long time. Toby held the lantern, and his hands were shaking hard enough to swing the light. "Watch her eye," Iona told him. "Not my hands. Her eye. Tell me when it changes." He watched her eye. Josiah came in off the fence line just as the last pull was needed and put his weight on the straps behind her. The calf came out onto the dry straw and did not breathe. Iona cleared its mouth and nose. Josiah went at its ribs with a twist of clean straw. Hard, the way you rub a man's hands. Nobody counted the seconds. Toby put a dry sack into Iona's hand before she asked for it. Then the calf pulled a breath, and its head came up off the floor, about 2 inches, and the whole barn seemed to start moving again. From the cabin, Junie was crying. Cal Duffy, who could barely close his fingers, dragged the unfinished cradle nearer the stove and warmed a bottle one-handed and got it into her, and by the time Iona came in, he had her asleep on his good shoulder. Nobody at Sparrow Bench was standing outside the work anymore. The wind on the 4th day was worse than anything that came before it, and that was when the north lashing went and the lifeline wire started to sing, which is where this began. Josiah went out on his hands and knees from stake to stake, with the rope around his chest and the bar and the wire in the bag on his back. The 5th stake had already snapped off at the ground. The loose lath panel came around out of the white and hit him across the shoulders and put him flat, and the bag came open, and half of what was in it went out across the drift and was gone in under a second. Ada's leather strap was the only reason the bag itself did not follow it. In the barn behind him, Pearl was bawling for a calf she could not see. In the cabin, Junie was crying. Iona stood in the porch with the rope wrapped twice around her wrist and her boot braced against the post, and she felt the line go slack, and then she felt nothing at all for 11 seconds. Then 3 sharp pulls came up the rope. Give line. She fed him another arm's length and another. He did not try to rebuild the panel. There was no rebuilding anything in that wind. He got a spare lath bundle across the frame on the diagonal and lashed it at 4 points with wire, bracing the whole bay against itself. And it was ugly work, and he knew it was ugly while he was doing it. It did not have to last. It had to last until morning. The rope stopped moving again. Iona pulled. It came, heavy, and then something crawled out of the white on one elbow and one knee and got a hand on the porch post. Josiah got himself upright against the wall. His beard had frozen into his collar. "It'll hold till morning," he said. Iona looked past him at the storm still tearing across the flat. Morning is enough. The wind broke on the 6th day. Nobody in that yard celebrated because nobody had the strength for it. They counted instead. Every head that had gone into the barn came out of the barn. The new calf had a patch of frostbite on one ear, the size of a coin and nothing else. The bedding was dry under the hand at floor level. The trough ran. The hayrick had no heat in it, anywhere the rodded could reach. The barn doors opened without a shovel, because the drift was out on the flat where it had been sent, 4 feet deep and 200 feet long, exactly where it had been invited. There was still wood stacked by the stove. Cal Duffy walked to the barn on his own feet. Josiah went around the place that morning with a notebook, and everything he wrote in it was a fault. 1 brace undersized. 2 stakes set too shallow. The flannel strips wanted stronger stitching where the wind worried them. The box over the water elbow needed a shed roof so meltwater would not sit on top of it. Iona watched him do it from the porch. "You've written down every weakness before you've counted one thing that lived." He closed the notebook. "The living will wait an hour." He looked out at the beat-up fence with its ugly diagonal patch in the North Bay. A weak spot that gets away with it once will do it again. Later the cloud broke enough to put a grey strip of light down the length of the valley. Steam came up off the cattle standing in the yard. "The children have their milk," Iona said. Josiah was still looking at the broken bay. The place still needs fixing. Neither of them said anything about spring. Neither of them said anything about leaving. That evening she set his gloves by the stove between the two lanterns, without ceremony. The way you put a thing back where it lives. When the roads opened at the end of the month, people came to Sparrow Bench looking for something other than gossip. Thaddeus Cole came first and went over the whole operation with his hands and his rod and his thermometer. Before he would say one word, he put his bare palm in the bedding. He counted the herd himself twice. He read the ledger from the first line Toby had printed in October to the shaky entries written by lamplight during the storm. Then he shut the book. The barn stayed dry, which is what killed most of the stock in this valley, not the cold. Your herd ate a fifth less than it should have. The water never quit for more than a day. And that fence is standing out where the snow wanted to lie down instead of where your door needed to open. He looked at Josiah. You found your own faults in October and fixed them in October. That is the entire trick. And I have been trying to sell it to grown men for 20 years. Cal Duffy said the other thing that needed saying, to anybody who would listen, all the rest of that winter. I'd have died in the open a quarter mile from a warm stove. I walked in on those stakes. Whitlock came last in February. He had lost better than 300 head off the North Range and half the roof of his big barn. He offered no apology, and Iona did not wait for one. He stood at the fence line a long while. How far out did you set it? 38 feet through the middle, Josiah said. We shifted it where the ground rolls, and you never nail it tight. If it stops the wind, you've built yourself a cliff. Whitlock nodded once slowly, the way a man does when the arithmetic has been done for him. Show me. Josiah walked the line with him in the snow and explained it twice because it was worth explaining twice. After everyone had gone, Iona took Josiah into the ranch office and laid a folded agreement on the desk. It gave him a share of the increase, authority over water, structures, and winter preparation, and one line that sat by itself at the bottom of the page, apart from all the rest. Toby and Junie Rennick would have a home at Sparrow Bench for as long as they wanted one, whatever happened between the two adults who signed it. Josiah read that line twice. Why would you sign away part of something that has always been yours? Iona turned the paper toward him. I'm not giving you anything of mine, she said. I'm writing down what you've already been carrying since September. They sat by the stove that night, and neither of them hurried to fill up the quiet. I came here asking for milk, Josiah said, into his cup. I never meant to end up owing you a life. You don't owe me one. Iona had both hands around her coffee. There's one here if you want a share of it. He smiled and it changed his whole face, and she realised she had never seen him do it. I'll stay till the snow's off. She looked out the window at the ice still standing on the north side of the fence posts. Stay till the grass comes back. Longer than that. They did not marry when the roads opened because there was work. They rebuilt the North Bay properly in March, and by April, 4 outfits in Longfork had put slat fence up on their own flats, and 2 of them had sent men over to be shown how far out to set it, and one of those men was Dorsey Whitlock's foreman. It was the second week of May before Josiah and Iona stood up in the kitchen in front of Thaddeus Cole and Hester Vance and said the words. The whole business took 11 minutes because Pearl was carving again and this one was also coming backward. Whitlock did not attend, but a bundle of 40 split lod